Good morning, Wheaton College community. At the very beginning of this message to you, I want you to know that I'm aware of two things. Number one, this is the end of the semester for you, so you have a lot of papers, presentations, and tests, right? I'm aware of that, and I want you to know that I, as your chaplain in our office, are praying for you for strength and focus, and that you'll do well. The other thing I want you to know I'm aware of is in our society as a whole, that right now, the beginning of the closing arguments in the Derek Chauvin trial are taking place, in which those events that led to the death of George Floyd are being investigated and a verdict will be rendered. And we're just praying that justice will prevail. I want you to know at the beginning, I'm so aware of that, and you could be distracted by those things, but I've chosen to stick with the message that the Lord put in my heart. It really goes all the way back to when I was a student here at Wheaton College. I was taking a course from Dr. Clyde Kilby. Yes, Dr. Clyde Kilby, whom Dr. Christina Bieber Lake is in a chair in his name in the Department of Literature. Yes, Kilby, like Kilby House, that some of you are living there. I had him for a course that was called Modern Mythology. And the day that really became kind of life-changing for me, the topic was the principle of first and second things. And he quoted C.S. Lewis, which of course all good Wheaties do. And this is what Dr. Kilby wanted us to get hold of. I put it up here because he put it in front of us as well. From his writings and from his one essay, Lewis said, "Apparently, the world is made this way. You can't get second things by putting them first. You can get second things only by putting first things first. When we put first things first, second things are not suppressed. Rather, they increase." I just want you to know that one class was almost worth all the tuition I paid at Wheaton College. Almost, I say. Because I tell you, it has shaped my thinking and my ministry, and really I've come to see that it should shape our entire lives and really speak into those two things I started with today. And you know the reason why. Because the first thing is God himself. This is going to be a first commandment sermon, nothing in the place of God. And the biblical message is that you and I, and every person who comes across our path, is made for God. And when the God for whom we were made and in whose image all of us were created is actually at the center of our being, it gives focus to every other part of our lives. It's only then that other pieces can fit together. And even if we lose those other things, they don't ruin our lives. It is the only thing that makes possible the life to the full that Jesus said he was going to die to bring to us. So I'll just tell you, I have made this point in countless weddings I've done in my over 4 decades of being a pastor. In the homily that I give, I will always say, yes, you're entering into a relationship where you take on a new next of kin in human relationships, but there is another relationship that has to eclipse that, and that is God must be put first. I'll tell you, when I used to do that when I was a young pastor, people would come up afterwards and say, "Pastor, why do you do that? Why didn't you just focus on the love that didn't you see the way they looked at one another?" And I saw that. But I am just telling you this, that if you put your husband or wife, if you put your child, a parent, a friend, or anything or anyone else in the place of God, that person will fail to be a good God. So the point I want to make today is that when that is true of you, that God is in the first place in your life, it changes everything. It really speaks into justice issues. It speaks into human relationships issues. It speaks into academic issues. And one of the things it speaks into is that it changes the way that you do what the book of Acts that we've been looking at this entire semester calls us all to do, to give witness to the person of Jesus until all nations hear about him. So here at Wheaton College, you can take a course from Dr. Jerry Root, and he will give you a lot of good principles and skills for actually giving witness to Jesus. But I tell you, if the only reason you speak about Jesus is to fulfill a requirement for his class, Or if the only reason why you ever speak about Jesus is out of some sense of duty or even guilt or shame because you haven't been doing it and you know you should, doing it isn't going to give you any joy. And I don't think it will be very effective either. Which, believe it or not, actually brings us to the text that the members of Dr. Ford's class have led us in today, Acts chapter 17. So the Apostle Paul, according to his own testimony that you can read in places like Philippians 3, had been putting other things in the first place in his life. And essentially, 2 Corinthians 5, he gives the testimony he had actually lived for himself. He had put himself in the first place in his life. And once again, I just want to tell you this. If you put yourself and what you want to have in your cravings in the first place in your life, you will prove to be a rotten God. But then he met Jesus, and that section in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 says, so now he no longer lived for himself, but he lived for this one who died for him and rose again. And in doing so, Paul at last began to find that life for which he had been created to live. And if you know his life, it wasn't easy. There were still challenges, still times of failure, but still it was good in every situation, he would say. He had learned to be content, and because he'd experienced the love of Christ in meeting the dying and resurrected Jesus, he knew that Jesus loved all people and knew all people, and he was compelled by the love of Christ to talk about Jesus. So, in Acts chapter 17, Paul made what seems to be a coincidental visit to the city of Athens, Greece. I don't know if you know, Athens was the educational, cultural, even the entertainment center of the ancient world. When I was in Pasadena, I used to think it's like Hollywood. It was the native city of Plato and Socrates. It was the adopted city of Aristotle and Epicurus and Zeno. And if you were to go there, it is a place of ongoing philosophical, political discussions, and especially incredibly divergent religious opinion. Now, up until this point in Paul's ministry, he had always been engaging in discussions with people who were monotheists. Their worldview is that there was simply one God in this world. But one day, things changed for Paul. He had been run out of this town called Berea because of his witness to Jesus, and he ended up being in Athens, Greece, waiting for his ministry partners, Silas and Timothy, to show up. But while he was there, he didn't feel like being in Athens was a waste of time, nor did he, as I think I'd be inclined to do, think, this is a good day for me just to be a tourist. No, he saw it as a divine appointment. So what did he do? Eventually, he showed up at the marketplace, the Agora. Now, you need to know, this wasn't just a shopping place. In fact, I have a picture here I want to show you of it, get an idea of it. It was the center of community life. It was an energetic place, alive with people. If you were to go there, some were heralding the news of the day. Some were discussing their philosophies that were going on, their politics. Many of them were promoting their religions. Now, I was a pastor in Southern California for 13 years. A lot of my people and many of the students who were there then were students at UC Berkeley. And when I talked about this and showed some of these pictures, they said, you know, Pastor Greg, this is a lot about Sproul Plaza here at Berkeley. I have a picture of that too, so you can envision it. If you've ever been there to Berkeley, that's really where life plays out. If you go there, there will be groups trying to recruit you into their student groups. If you hear of all the protests that happen at Berkeley, it always happens out at Sproul Plaza. Do you think we need a Sproul-like plaza-type place here at Wheaton College? Maybe in front of Edmund Chapel? I'm not sure. Well, when Paul went into the marketplace, he encountered all these people who had very different views about God than he had encountered before. Most of the people there were polytheists. They believed in many gods, though some were like the Epicureans, who were more like deists and thought God wasn't close to them. And others were more like the Stoics, who generally were more like pantheists, thinking that this deity is probably all of us are a part of it in some way. So as Paul first began speaking to them, and I loved how our worship team helped us to feel this. There was a lot of misunderstanding. Some of them just called him a babbler, which meant that they thought he was this guy just bringing in every kind of idea that he could possibly find, but they don't hold together. But according to verse 17, Paul kept at it. It tells us day after day, he kept going into the agora and he reasoned with the people. I'm sure he had an influence on them, but I'll tell you, it was a learning experience for him too. I'm just sure of it. He began to understand how other cultures and other people viewed the world, how people thought, what they valued, and how perhaps the message of Jesus might actually speak in to their lives. And doing that gave him an opportunity that was just huge. He was given the chance to go to the Areopagus, Mars Hill. Now, this word Areopagus spoke both about this influential group of people who would gather when there were disputes going on, as well as to the place on the hillside there in the Agora. I've been there to look at this. And when Paul went to meet, he would give his lecture, but there would also be not only the leaders who were there, but the crowds who listened in to the discussion. In other words, this was an enormous evangelistic opportunity. Now, students here at Wheaton, there's so many things I want to say to you about Acts 17, but knowing my time is so short, I just have boiled down a few things I really want to say to you about this. If this gospel is going to make it to every people group in the world and to the ends of the earth, first, I want to say a few things about putting God first in your life. That for us to be effective in being those witnesses, the first thing, namely God, must become first in your life. You really can't grasp what happened with Paul in the city of Athens without remembering that Paul had had a genuine encounter with God through faith in Jesus. It was so life-changing for him, but also for the church, and I think for the world. If you read the book of Acts, 3 times the same story is told. Now, when he had this authentic experience with God, the first thing that kicked in was the first commandment: nothing in the place of God. That means that Paul knew when he went there to the city and saw all these other statues and all the other things people were worshiping, he knew that the first thing for which all of us were made was not the first thing in their lives. He knew that they needed to have the same thing that he had experienced, seeking after spiritual reality. He didn't really find it until he had actually met God through Jesus. And he knew that when he was there, that the gods that the others believed in was not the real God. That if the Stoics really believed that God was a part of everything, that no, there is a God who is a real person. If the Epicureans believed that there is a God, but he's not engaged in our human affairs, no, God is near. And he certainly believed that all of those gods and statues that he saw, that they were not the God that he had met. So when you look at Paul going to Mars Hill, you can't picture him just trying to win a debate or a philosophical discussion. What he was wanting to do is clarify the identity of the person, the God who had filled up his life, because he knew that all people needed to know him, all made in the image of God. The first thing I want to say to you is, in investigation, is God truly the first thing in your life? Second thing I want to say to you is how we engage people. It's been so much in my heart. And what I see from Paul and from Jesus is that I want you to learn to enter into the lives of people, to seek understanding, and always to do so with respect. You know this. A part of the culture you and I are now living in is so polarized. We don't have places like the Agora where people can just sit down and listen and talk to one another and listen to one another. What do? We either talk at one another or we just post something on social media. And I think Paul shows us a better way. I love verse 17. So he went in there and he reasoned day after day with the people. Now, listen to me. The term that's translated reasoned with is dialogomeni. Dialogomeni. Do you hear the word dialogue? It's a word that the people in Greece loved. It's because it's used for the way that Socrates taught. We call it the Socratic method. Many of the teachers here at Wheaton College use this. It's not one-way communication like I'm doing with you right now. No. It gave the opportunity for questions to be posed. Those who were going to be good at the Socratic method needed to be able to listen to people and to hear what their real issues well. And that's what Paul did. He didn't just preach at people, sat down and dialogued with them and listened. And he did it over and over again until he was able to see how God could speak into their lives. So at first, they called him a babbler, but eventually he gained a hearing. Listen to verse 19 again. We want to know, Paul, about this new teaching that you're presenting. Your teaching still sounds strange to our ears. We would like to know what you mean. I just tell you, you don't gain that kind of hearing by just yelling at people or posting something on social media. And it's really the way Jesus did his life, isn't it? He entered into the lives of people, whether a prostitute or whether a tax collector or a Roman centurion. We've been seeing that all year in our chapels. And I see that Jesus said, not only do I do this, but as the Father sent me, this is the way that I'm sending you. To see people as God sees people and entering into their lives. I'll tell you, I've been a pastor for so long, and I found that being a pastor meant that I became isolated from anybody other than church people. I thought, how do I engage in doing this? So I learned to go to the same coffee shop every morning at the same time, and you found the same people there, asking for the same server at the restaurants I'd go to, checking out with the same checkout person, and just beginning to develop a relationship. I'll tell you now, for all these years, many have come to faith in Jesus and have been baptized. Jason Emmanuel Petty, do you know his name? His stage name is Propaganda. He is a spoken word artist, and I'm just telling you, he's a good one in Southern California. In one of his spoken word messages, one of my favorite ones, he calls us to do what the Apostle Paul did in Athens, to move into the lives of people, to identify with the fact that they can't do it on their own, and to be those ambassadors of good news and of reconciliation wherever we can. So here's a part. I can't do it like Propaganda does it. Here's just a part of his spoken word message entitled Justice and the Gospel. You can have a heart that breaks for a dying city, yet have nothing to offer them. Wait, that's the problem. Them. There is no them. Them is us. Culture is you. Culture is me. We're our city. We're the culture. So, we too are the problem. And our Savior, no, he wasn't a commuter. He moved in. He spoke the language of the broken. He spoke our language. The culture is us. It's you. We're participants. How could we possibly be the solution? We need someone to move in. And the Savior moved in. This is your city. He came and walked the streets of your soul. And you, in the same vein, must move in. You go. You pray that the gospel prospers, because if it prospers, you will too. So I just tell you, like Jesus and Paul, we are to enter into relationships of respect and love with the people around us, understand their lives, find out what they enjoy, and especially where they hurt, and see where a relationship with God might change everything. Third thing I just want to say, I'll have to say this briefly because of time. I think we learn here something about beginning where people are. Beginning where people are. I think we have to start earlier in many of our discussions to simply talk about who God is. And that begins with having a real encounter with him and discovering that many times the worldviews they have aren't consistent with the God that you know. Paul did that. When I was in Southern California with those conversations that I told you about, I almost never met an atheist, even though Caltech is there, JPL NASA is there. People were spiritual people. But I began to realize that they didn't know the God. And this is exactly what Paul says. You even have an idol over here saying to the unknown God, I don't think you know the God who is real and who loves you and is near to you and can change your life. So I think we have to learn to start a little bit earlier in our conversations in the world that we are in. So many people are unchurched and don't have an idea of the God that we believe in. So I want to say that to us as well. And then finally, I'm praying that for us here at Wheaton, as we participate in what God is doing, carrying good news to every tribe, language, and nation, that will develop a way of life. And I think I've written it here for you, to find the courage to speak of God, even if at first people call us a babbler, and especially to name the name of Jesus. When I read Acts 17, there's an obvious question that is begging to be answered, and it is, Paul, how can you know that your God is the only real God in the face of all these gods? It's a big question, isn't it? Same question you and I have to address, the exclusive claims of Jesus. So many things to be said, but from verse 18, I want to make just one point to you. So listen to me here carefully right now. Verse 18 tells us that Paul was constantly proclaiming the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. And then at the end of his sermon that was there, he said this, the culmination, God has given us proof of my message by raising Jesus from the dead. So I asked myself, why in Athens, and really in every city he went into, is the resurrection from the dead central? I'll tell you, one of a number of reasons for this is that death is the great leveler. You go into a culture and you wonder what the needs are, and the fact is, there's one need that every human being you meet is going to have, and that is, we live in a dying world. Do you believe that? I mean, how could we live through this pandemic without knowing it? How could we even be watching this George Floyd trial without knowing this? Death comes to every person, and sometimes it comes what seems to us to be unjustly. So if that's going to be true, where do we speak into the real needs of people? We know that this unrelenting enemy that is cross-cultural, that is called death, has met a greater master, right? It's a message for every culture. This lasting sting that has affected your family and your friends has been turned around. I'll tell you, everywhere I've gone in this world, when you meet people from a different race or nation, I always know that they need to know that death is not the end of things, that we can have a certain hope in a dying world, and it's because Jesus and Jesus alone is risen. And I pray that we'll be able to find a way to talk about God and to name the name of the risen Jesus. For I'm telling you, every human being needs it. Well, my time is gone. But let me end by just going back to where I started, to that first point. The joy that comes in giving witness, the effectiveness in witness, flows out of the first thing being first in your life. So here's the obvious question. Did I write it here for you? I hope. What competes with God for the first place in your life? What is it in this world about which you think, I don't know if I can really be satisfied or even happy if I don't have that? Is it a relationship? Often is. Is it a sexual experience that somehow has made it into your very identity? And you think, if I can't pursue it the way I want, I cannot be satisfied. Here at Wheaton, could it be success in academics? Or music? Athletics? I want you to nail it down. What competes with God as the first affection of your life? And I pray you'll surrender that to God, putting him first, saying, even if that thing is taken away, I will find my life in you. Why do I say it? C.S. Lewis. You can't get second things by putting them first. You can get second things only by putting first things first. When we put first things first, second things are not suppressed. Rather, they increase. Do you believe it? Do it, and it will be to your joy and to his glory. Amen.